For the Sertronics employees, please come and sit down. I know it's getting crowded, but please find a seat.
Sorry.
Okay, we're so honored to have the governor here. I want to try to make you all feel comfortable. Governor, I would like to welcome you to Sertronics. Governor, I would like to introduce you to ordinary Americans that are doing extraordinary things. We are bound together here at Sertronics by our values, and we're proud of our independent, employee-owned organization. We're working very hard in contract manufacturing, which is a very difficult, competitive market in severe economic times. But we are passionate about retaining and growing manufacturing jobs because we believe that that will add value not only to the 185 families that we serve, but to our local community, to the state of New Hampshire, and to America. Sertronics, I would like to introduce you to another ordinary American. Born in South Paul, Minnesota, one of 5 children, son of a truck driver, whose mom passed away while he was young. First in his family to receive a college degree. From there he went on to law school. He was elected to the Minnesota legislature and rose to become the majority leader, and was elected for 2 terms as governor of Minnesota. Governor, we share the values that you were raised: hard work, family, fiscally conservative, and a belief in the concept of independence and empowering people. The governor announced on Monday in Iowa his candidacy for the President of the United States, and we are honored to have you visit Sertronics. Governor Tim Pawlenty.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you for the gracious introduction, and thank you to Sertronics for the hospitality and graciousness of opening your doors and having a chance to come and get acquainted with you and to share a message and my vision for the future of the United States of America. My name is Tim Pawlenty, and I'm running for President of the United States. And I come from South St. Paul, Minnesota, as Geraldine mentioned just a minute ago. One of the challenges and opportunities I have is outside of Minnesota. I'm not that well known, but it's a challenge and an opportunity I've experienced before in my life. When I was first running for governor in 2001 for the 2002 elections in Minnesota, I was just a newly minted candidate. Not many people knew who I was. I was viewed as a long shot underdog, didn't have any money, no name ID. And I flew around the state that fall with a friend who had like a 2-seater airplane, bought him some gas, and he agreed to fly me around. And went to these little towns in rural Minnesota, and hardly anybody showed up for my press conference. It was like the one local reporter and the airport manager, and then like the airport dog, would come strolling through. And I was feeling a little discouraged about it, but that night I landed back in the Twin Cities, and I was coaching youth soccer. And so I was the coach for my daughters. They were back then, I think probably 6 or 7 years old, one of their teams, and I took my suit off and walked onto the soccer field, put on my little coach's shirt and had the clipboard and whistle. And as I was walking out onto the field, these little girls that I was coaching come running up to me, and they were yelling, "Are you running for governor? Are you running for governor?" And I thought to myself, wow, this campaigning really works. I've only been on the campaign trail 8 hours, and my message has already permeated the brains of these 7-year-old girls. And I kind of pridefully puffed up and I said, yeah, I'm running for governor. And this one girl, Kelly, looked up at me. I'll never forget it. She said, "Cool." She said, "Do you think you could get me Jesse Ventura's autograph?" So I want to introduce myself to you, and I want to just share a few thoughts about the reason I'm running for President of the United States, and obviously want to ask for your vote and your support. But this is a country that we all love. It is the greatest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. And if we had time to go around this room and ask each of you to stand up and share a reflection about what you love, what you enjoy, what brings you passion, what you get meaning out of life in. And we started with Pablo and then went to Jim and then went around the room. And each of you stood up. I think we'd hear some incredible stories about the power of family and what that means to you. And I think we'd hear some incredible stories about faith in your life and what that's meant to you. I think we hear incredible stories like Geraldine's about having a dream and a vision and having the risk tolerance and the entrepreneurial spirit to start something and grow something, and the benefits that come with that in terms of jobs and economic opportunity for the team. I think we'd hear great stories about successes that you've had at work or outside of work. I think we'd hear stories about defeats that you've had and how maybe you've dusted yourself off and got back in the game after a defeat, or how maybe in a challenging moment in life, and we always have them, maybe for some of you it's been finances or others health, that we hear stories about individuals pulling alongside as family members or friends or loved ones who would pat you on the back and dust you off a little bit, give you some encouragement, get you back in the game. I think we hear stories about neighborhood and community and places of worship and philanthropy and charity. But I don't think we hear too many stories about how a government transformed your life in some profound personal and individual way. I share that with you because the greatness of this nation is largely dependent upon the goodness and greatness and spirit of the American people. And within each of us is this American spirit. And if people wonder about the future of our country, one of the most incredible things I notice as I travel the country, that many of our fellow Americans really are feeling discouraged. You know, they feel that maybe the country is slipping away in ways that reflect that the future may not be as bright as the past. And we sometimes talk about what is it going to take to get the country back on track? What's it going to take to restore America's promise? How can we do that together as a team? And what we really need to do is not have it be a mystery, because we know what works. You can look back over the chapters of success of this country and see what made us great, what worked, what didn't work, and then bring those values and those approaches to the challenges and opportunities of our time. But it starts with our leaders and each of us being able to honestly and candidly identify the problems and then tell the truth to each other about what they really are and what it's really going to take to get this country back on track. And a lot of people say, look, if politicians or political leaders are too honest, they may lose an election. I'm afraid that if we're not honest enough, we may lose our country. And the hour is later than people realize. We've got a lot of challenges, and you don't have to take my word for it or the rhetoric of some other politician. You don't have to listen to the voices on the right or the left. Just look at it as a matter of 6th grade mathematics. You can see a chart of what our spending obligations are that have already been made, and you can see the money that we're likely going to take in as a federal government. And you can see those lines never catch up. And in fact, they're spreading apart faster and further, even as we're gathered here today. Somebody told me earlier today that the United States is deficit spending $40,000 a second. So last year, the federal government took in $2.2 trillion in revenue. It sounds like a lot of money, $2.2 trillion with a T. But they spent $3.7 trillion. 40 cents of every dollar spent is debt or deficit spending. And they have trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see now. And so I'm not here to give you a political speech, but I will tell you that President Obama came into office and he made some promises about what it was going to take to get the country moving forward. I don't believe he's kept those promises. In fact, I personally don't believe he's even willing to tell the truth about what it's really going to take to get the country back on track. So I announced my campaign the other day in Iowa, and this is one of the first stops of our It's Time for the Truth tour as we travel around the country. And we're speaking truth to power. So the other day we were in Iowa, And for example, many of you have been to Iowa, you know it's a big agriculture state. They have a huge ethanol industry there. And we said, look, I'm from a neighboring state. I've got a big agricultural part of my state as well. I understand agriculture. I just didn't, fall off the rutabaga cart in New York City. I understand agriculture, but given how massive our problems are, how deep in the hole we are, how drowning we are in debt and deficit, I said it's time that we have to phase out the ethanol subsidies in Iowa. Now the room went pretty flat when I said that. I didn't exactly get a standing ovation over that, but we have to do that. I went down to Florida the next day. Now this is one of the most senior citizen intensive populations in the country, and we talked very directly and very candidly about what it's going to take to fix Social Security. Now these are delicate topics, but somebody has to say it, somebody has to lead. I don't think the president is on this, and I will. So we stepped forward and said, look, on Social Security, everybody in this room knows, the whole country knows, it's got a huge problem. It is sinking. And we need to save Social Security. And by the way, if you don't know this, under the current law, or the current approach, if Social Security isn't reformed, there's automatic cuts that kick in down the road. So it is going to lead to a worse road if we don't fix it. So what do we need to do? I think it's okay for us to say here in the Granite State and across America, we know we got a problem, so let's look each other in the eye and say, for the next generation, the ones that are coming into the workforce, we're going to let them know now that over time we're going to gradually raise the retirement age. Not suddenly, not for the folks in the program now, not for the folks who are near the program now, but the retirement ages were set a long time ago before life expectancies went up much higher. So it's reasonable to say that with fair notice and for the next generation, we're going to gradually raise the retirement age over time. Now, I also don't like means testing philosophically, but given the hole that we're in, we got to choose from some not perfect options. So we went down to Florida the other day and said, look, if you are a wealthy senior, we're going to means test part of the Social Security program. The cost of living adjustment each year, Social Security benefits get adjusted a little bit for the cost of living. If you're poor or middle income, you should continue to get that fully. But if you're fortunate enough to be wealthy, we're going to have to reduce or take away, through means testing, your annual Social Security cost of living adjustment. There's a great debate about Medicare and Medicaid, and there are similar solutions for that. And in the interest of time, I won't go through that because I want to have time for questions and discussions. But we have to tell each other the truth. These things are not popular. If we keep ducking and bobbing and weaving like our current president is, again, we're not just going to be losing an election. We're going to be losing the country. And you don't have to take my word for it. You go look at the map. Now we're going to go to New York City tomorrow. And we're also going to tell them the truth about what it's going to take to clean up that mess. And we can't have Wall Street continuing to have the perspective that they can run themselves like some sort of craps game at Caesar's Palace, and then expect the taxpayers to back up their recklessness and their irresponsibility. So we're going to send the message to them, no more carve-outs, no more special treatments, no more bailouts, no more TARP. And if you want to run your business like a casino, then when you have losses, you're going to experience the consequences. And the great economist Milton Friedman says we had markets so that we can reward positive behavior and punish bad behavior. So it has consequences. And so that's the kind of discipline and return to common sense that we need, not just on Wall Street, but we also need across this great country. Now, I know you're busy. You've got busy family lives with jobs and family and community and other things that you're involved in. So if you have time to go to think tanks and seminars and read white papers, and I hope you have a chance to do that. There's some really good information in all of that. But all you really need to know about most of government and government reform is this. Go to a wedding or two weddings on a given weekend. Go to one where there's an open bar and the refreshments are free. Go to another one where there's a cash bar and people have to pay for some or all of their drinks. You'll see two very different sets of behaviors. Now the point of that story is people consume things differently if at least some of the money being spent is their money. If you think it's quote-unquote free, you don't take care of it the same way. You don't become as wise and informed of a consumer as you would in terms of things like measuring price and quality. And if the person providing the service only gets paid for volume, they're going to crank out a lot of volume. Could you imagine how Sertronic's business model would change if the only thing that you measured for how you got paid was how much volume you cranked out? It didn't matter the quality, the price didn't particularly matter, didn't matter whether the product actually worked or not. All you got paid for is cranking out volume. If I could charge Geraldine for volume, you'd be out of business. Unfortunately, that's mostly though how most of these government systems work. We've built these systems where, whether it's education or healthcare, many other things, where people are under the false impression that it's free. They can consume as much of it as they like endlessly without being concerned about price measurements or quality measurements. And then the provider provides the service based on volume, like in healthcare. And then the myth, really the lie, is created that it's free. And the bill goes somewhere else and somebody else pays for it. The truth is this: government money isn't free. We either pay for it in taxes or our children pay for it in debt. That's how it gets paid for. And so these systems where people get to consume things without being at least somewhat responsible for what it costs, whether it's any good or not, and having financial incentives to make wise choices are really outdated. We got to reform these systems like I did in Minnesota. So we got a lot of work to do in this country. But the first thing is we've got to get the debt and the deficit under control. We have to get this economy growing again. We got $4 a gallon gas. We have crushing levels of unemployment in the nation still. We have a federal government that is out of control in terms of its spending and finance. And we have leaders who seem like they do not have the fortitude to step up and call it out and put the solutions on the table to fix it. I do. And that's why I'm running for president. I really appreciate the chance to come by here to say hello, but I really want to hear from you what questions that you have. But let me just close by saying we can do this. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or something else, or neither, we need everybody to come together. If we're going to solve a $14 trillion problem, we're going to need all 309 million people. And I'll just remind you of one great story about Michael Jordan. He was playing basketball in Chicago one night. He scored 56 points by himself, and it was an amazing performance in the peak of his career. Towards the end of the game, the coach said, well, MJ had a great game. Let's get him off the court while there's still a minute or two left in the game so the hometown crowd can give him an ovation. And he walked off the court, and they did. And into the game goes a rookie who had never played the game before. In the closing seconds of the game, he's trying to shoot. He gets fouled, so he gets 1 point. The game ends, the buzzer goes off, everybody goes in the locker room, and of course the press is hovering around Michael Jordan and that spectacular 56-point performance. But one enterprising reporter drifts off over to the rookie who's sitting in the corner of the room by himself and says, you know, what should we take from your first NBA performance? What does this mean to you? And he looked up at the camera with a smile on his face and said, you know, I think tonight should be remembered as the night that Michael Jordan and I together scored 57 points. Now we all look to Geraldine as the Michael Jordan of Sertronics, but I know enough about the history of this company and her leadership style and her vision, where she has said this is not about Geraldine. This is about the team at Sertronics. And the model that you use here and the ethic that you have here about team coming together and the ESOP employee ownership model and people trying to have as few titles as possible with a flat organization saying we're all in this together, we're rowing in the same direction with the same vision, the same goals. That's the kind of attitude and fortitude that we need to return to the United States of America. This is the greatest country the world's ever known, not because we're the biggest, we're not because we're the cheapest, we're not, although we need to be more competitive. This is the greatest country in the world because we've been free and we share these common values and experiences that make us different than the rest of the world. Don't take that word freedom for granted. It's not some throwaway word that politicians whip around. If you study cultures and societies across time and across the globe, the amount of freedom that we have in this country to worship, to associate, to dream, to invent, to innovate, to take a risk, to build something, to share that dream with others, to expand it, is different than other countries around the world and other cultures throughout time. That is what makes us a great nation. It isn't about some big bureaucracy dragging things into Washington, D.C. and saying, We're going to have a top-down system where now we're going to have the government tell you what your choices are, and there may only be one, a government monopoly choice or a limited number of choices. And guess what? We're going to staff it by bureaucrats and public employees. And guess what? We're going to take more of your money to pay for it. And guess what? We'll run it like we do every other program in Washington, D.C., and it'll be insolvent in 15 years. That is not the future of the United States of America. The future of the United States of America is Americans saying, we can do this, we understand that government has a role, but it's a limited role, and we're about the business of individual responsibility, entrepreneurial activity, risk-taking, dreaming, designing, building things, growing things, being faster, better, quicker than the rest of the world. Our role in the world is not to lag behind China or anywhere else. Our role in the world is to lead. And that's not about government, that's about people. So I know this is lunch break, and I've been warned about keeping it short so we can have some interaction and then get you back to work. But let's see what questions and issues are on your mind. Yes?
Governor Pawlenty, one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now in our state is the right to work bill, and I know that it's also a federal issue. Where do you stand on the right to work?
Yeah, thank you. Everybody could hear the issue is the right to work legislation, which is a phrase which says basically if you want to work and it's a union setting, you have to belong to the union in full respect. Now, you should know that I grew up in a meatpacking town. My dad, for much of his life, was a truck driver, a Teamster truck driver. He then got promoted later to dispatcher and terminal manager, and we were very proud of that, although I think my first paycheck out of college was bigger than my dad's last paycheck. I remember comparing them with him. I was the only one in my family who was able to go to college. My brothers and sisters weren't able to go, not because they didn't have the capacity, they just didn't have the opportunity. So one of my brothers worked his whole life in a grocery store, the United Food and Commercial Workers. He worked there 39 and a half years. I said to him at a recent family gathering just a few weeks ago, Steve, why did you quit after 39 and a half years? Why didn't you just go 40 and round it off at an even 40? And he looked at me and said, Tim, I didn't want people to think I was a lifer. And he was a union organizer. My other brother worked in an oil refinery for part of his career, and he was with the United Atomical Chemical Workers group. My sister's a one-on-one special ed aide in a public school, and she's in a union. I worked in a union for 7 years. My mom died when I was 16. She had ovarian cancer. My dad lost his job for a while, not too long after she died, and so when I was young, in addition to all of that, those big meatpacking plants, not unlike the mills in Manchester, they all shut down summarily in the late 60s, early 70s. We had thousands of moms and dads in my community unemployed, trying to take care of families, not having a hopeful future in terms of their family budgets and the like. And I share all that as a backdrop for this. I think I'll be the only candidate in the race for president who's actually been in a union that I know of. There may be others, but that I know of. And so I know what I'm talking about. And I don't like the out of control or excessive nature that unions have taken on in this country. And I don't like the fact that you can be denied your freedom to belong or not belong to a group of your choosing. This is the United States of America. The Constitution says that we have the freedom to associate with people that we want or not. And any organization that tells you as a matter of law, using the police powers of the government in New Hampshire or the federal government, that you must belong to a group is offensive to me. I want to belong to groups that I feel like belonging to, and I don't want somebody else telling me that I have to belong to. So thank you. Thanks for asking the question. And in the public employee side, by the way, on the flip side of this, or additional side, we were in Washington, D.C. yesterday with part of this truth tour, telling the truth to the federal bureaucracy that they work for the taxpayers and that they shouldn't be getting a better deal than the people who are paying their paychecks. So, some of you know that public employees, they're hardworking, good people. I don't blame them. They're just working a system that's really quite outdated. And it used to be, in the old days, people would say, I'm going to be going to public employment because, look, the pay isn't that good, but the benefits are. And so there's a trade-off, and that made it worth going into public employment. Now, under most studies, if you compare it, all the salary and all the benefits, and go all in and compare it to the private sector counterparts, they're over-benefited and overpaid. And so we called for a freeze of that until the government employee pay and benefits are no greater than the private sector counterparts yesterday in Washington, D.C. In Minnesota, we took on all these issues. I should tell you, Minnesota is like being the governor of Vermont. I love my state, but I was a conservative in a very liberal place. But on taxes, spending, public employee pension reform, welfare reform, litigation reform, we moved the needle hard on all of it. And didn't just talk about it, we got it done in a very difficult environment. Sorry, or ma'am.
On Social Security, if something doesn't get fixed now, how long do you think it would be before, like people at my age, I want to retire someday and I want something there. I worked many years very hard. If that doesn't get fixed now, what would happen?
Yeah, well, so you're 29, right? Well, the current law, and I'll get you the exact date, or we can get it for you quickly, but as I understand it, the current law has automatic cuts in Social Security when the fund reaches a certain level of insolvency, and it's not very many years in the future. And I can't remember offhand the exact date, but it's baked in 20 plus or 25% cuts in everything. And that would affect not people coming in the future, that would affect current beneficiaries, current moms and dads, retired, current grandmas and grandpas, people who are relying on that and barely getting by. And we got to fix this. And again, it's not about fluffy promises. You notice I didn't say we're going to fix it and not tell you how. I gave you the specifics about what we're going to do. And I got people mad at me about that. I got people mad at me about the ethanol comments. I got people mad at me about the Social Security comments. But this is what it's going to take to fix the country. And fluffy promises, President Obama's got great, fancy speeches, but fluffy promises don't put gas in your gas tank. And fluffy promises don't pay your mortgage. And fluffy promises don't pay your paycheck. Last time I checked, you can't go buy your kids' clothes with fluffy promises. So we actually need jobs, and we need a private sector economy, not just a government sector economy that's growing. And this thing is sputtering, and in my view, not recovering like it should, and we need to get it fixed. But on Social Security, that's what happens. And that's why, in order to save it, we got to fix it. Other questions? Comments? Predictions about the Bruins? Yeah.
I'm really concerned about Israel.
Yes.
I really am. I'm afraid. We've always been friends with them, and I'm afraid that, I'm really concerned for them. And it says in the Bible, who's ever for Israel, God's for them.
Question related to our relationship with Israel and the importance of Israel. And I've been to the Middle East many times. I've been to Iraq 5 times and Afghanistan 3 times. I've been to Israel. I've been to Jordan and Kuwait and Turkey and other places in the Middle East, and I've met with leaders there. And my view is this. There is one country in the Middle East that shares our values of free and fair elections, free and fair democracy, human rights, and an alliance and friendship, true friendship with the United States. And there are others who have varying degrees of cooperation or friendship, but they are our best ally in the region. And the president came out the other day, and this is on the heels of him saying and doing other things that unsettled and unnerved Israel. He came out the other day and said that he believes the imposition of a Palestinian state in the Middle East, or a negotiation of it, would be based on the 1967 borders, before the 1967 war. Now that greatly unnerves Israel and gives them enormous concern. So Netanyahu was here and of course responded to this very directly, but they don't believe those borders are defensible. No American president has ever uttered that phrase, 1967 boundaries, explicitly. And President Obama, again, did something to unnerve the relationship, concern our Israeli friends, and I believe put their security in jeopardy. For this reason, if you cannot simply impose things on Israel, first of all, at all. They have to be comfortable with it and negotiate in their own right. We can encourage. But secondly, we can't put things like that out there at all. But you also got to remember there's important concessions and agreements that would have to precede any formation of a Palestinian state. Starting with, are the people we negotiating with even willing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state? And the answer so far is no. And keep in mind the Palestinians have just merged Hamas, or trying to, with Fatah. Hamas is a terrorist organization. President Obama declines, refuses to call them a terrorist organization. They are a terrorist organization. They have in their charter words to the effect that their goal, or one of their goals, is to destroy Israel. We can't expect Israel to negotiate with somebody who has in their charter the destruction of Israel. And in addition, those boundaries, if they were imposed, have all kinds of problems, including control of the Golan Heights, which are an elevated platform, the potential for a divided Jerusalem, which is unacceptable. He used the word contiguous, and if you understand, of course, that you have the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, those are not contiguous parcels currently, so if you use the word contiguous, you have all sorts of other alarms and concerns that get set off. It's a really bad idea, tactically, but as importantly, we can't have this daylight with Israel. We have to stand shoulder to shoulder with them because their enemies and our enemies see that daylight and they try to exploit it. So I really don't like what he did. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do we make healthcare more accessible and more affordable?
That's great. Question related to healthcare. How do you make it more accessible and affordable? I would also add one more thing. Make sure it's good healthcare. So, when you think about healthcare, we think about three things. What does it cost, and is it affordable? 2, is it accessible, and part of that is affordability. And 3 is it any good? In other words, how do we keep the quality up? So it's cost, quality, and access. Now, I don't know about Surgetronics, but if it's like most other businesses, most other families, most other levels of government, this is one of your biggest financial concerns. If you look at the budgets of government in this country, healthcare is a driving force way beyond anything else in these budgets. So in Minnesota, for example, our health and human service budget in the state, not long ago, was 15% of the state's budget, then 20, 25, 30, 35, on its way to 40, and at the rate at which it's growing, it will grow up to 3/4 of the entire state's budget within about 15 years. And it'll consume almost all the money. There'll be very little left for schools and roads and the other things that we need to do as a state. So this issue has to be addressed. Has to be addressed. Now, President Obama stood in the 2008 election and said this: I will fix health care. He said, I will do it with Republicans. I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he said. 3, he said, I oppose the individual mandate. It's a bad idea. 4, he said, I will focus on cost containment because that's what most people are concerned about. Now, the rest is history. He went to Washington, D.C. He became president. He dropped his opposition to the individual mandate and became a leading champion of it. 2, he didn't focus on cost containment. He focused on expanding access, but he didn't fix the system. He's now expanding access to a broken system. And then 3, the quality of it is not going to improve. So what would I do? Here's what I would do based on my experience in Minnesota. The answer, and this is just 2 different worldviews, their worldviews drag it into Washington, D.C., have the government take more control of it, begin to limit people's options about what their health care can look like, have it regulated by bureaucrats and public employees, and then tax people more to pay for it on a system that will be insolvent within 15 years and probably sooner. I don't believe that's the approach we should take. I think it's the wrong approach. I think it's going to make healthcare less affordable. It is going to make the quality go down, not up. I think it's one of the worst pieces of legislation in the modern history of the country, and I joined the lawsuit in Florida to try to get it declared unconstitutional. That being said, we still got a problem. And the problem is we just debated healthcare for 2 years in the country, and he swung and missed, big time, and made it worse. Foul ball, actually. We now have to fix the system. And it gets back to what I said to you earlier. When we had a situation like this in Minnesota, we said to the state employees, you can go pick any health plan that you like, and providers. But if you pick one that is more expensive, and increasingly now we're able to measure quality as well, if you go somewhere that's more expensive with lower quality, you're going to pay more. And if you go somewhere that is more efficient with higher quality, you'll pay less. Guess where people go? 80% of the state employees migrated to higher quality, more efficient plans, and the premium increases in that state employee health insurance plan were dramatically below market for 7 years, and a few of the years actually 0% increases. Why? Because even in a primitive form, even in a rudimentary form, people had to pay some attention to what stuff costs, and they began to change their behavior. And then we said to the providers at a separate program, we're not just going to pay you for everything anymore just based on volume. So if you have a chronic condition, or a loved one in your family does, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity, and a few others, 80% of all the money we spend in healthcare is in about 5 chronic conditions. And the cost of your care and the outcomes for that care, the healthcare outcomes, vary wildly depending on where you go get your care. And I'm not talking by a little bit. In the old days, we couldn't really measure this. Now we can. So it used to be somebody in a white coat would step into your room and say, trust me, here's what we're going to do, and you got to just trust him or her. But the reality of it is, different clinics and hospitals and providers have